Hi, I'm Leena Rao here at the TechCrunch TV studios. We're here with Ted Schlein for our Ask a VC series. Ted is joining us from Kleiner Perkins, where he is the managing partner of the firm. Welcome, Ted. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I have to say I'm really honored because I know you're one of the sort of most experienced VCs out there right now.
It just means I'm old, right?
But you know, you've been doing this now at Kleiner for a little under 20 years, which is a long time to be in the business. I want to start out just talking a little bit about what has changed. You know, what's changed in the past, 17 years that you've been doing this?
Well, entrepreneurs are younger, which I think is actually a really interesting change in the sense that an entrepreneur is able to start their companies at a younger age, gain access to capital easier than in the past. So no longer is one of the criteria, or how much scar tissue do you have to be an entrepreneur? You're getting your scar tissue, from the get-go. And I think it's an interesting phenomenon because a lot of them don't have that much experience to get started. I think it's wonderful and refreshing, and sometimes it turns out really well. Sometimes not so well. But there's also a huge amount of capital now available, which is interesting because in the venture community it's shrunk in the last decade, let's say, but the ability to access capital has grown quite a bit by an entrepreneur. And lots of people I get asked the question a lot of times about the Series A crunch or something like that.
Right.
I think it's a kind of natural phenomenon because there's so much capital available. These young entrepreneurs can get companies started so simply. In the past, the venture community acted as that initial vetting process rather than a seed. Somebody writing lots of seed checks. So
are you seeing a lot of that capital in the traditional VC world, or are you seeing that capital spread out amongst angels? Is that?
Well, it's both. I think the influx of angels have caused a lot of VCs to also start doing more seeding. So by definition, all it just means is the number of seeds is multiplied by a lot, which means lots of more companies get started. But the reality is only a finite number of companies really can make it to the end game. So you have a higher mortality rate.
Right.
And that's why I don't think this concept of the Series A crunch shouldn't be that surprising to anybody. I think it's just a natural selection going on, and it's kind of just the law of numbers.
Is there anything that's changed that you think is for the negative? Like, is there anything that's changed that isn't a positive change?
Anything for the negative? It's such a great industry.
There's nothing negative about it?
Well, you get frustrated with the ebbs and flows of Wall Street and what's in and what's out, and so much of investing depends upon ultimately what things are valued at, and that can be very frustrating. I think there's a lot of policy that's kind of anti-entrepreneurial. That's a negative, and I think as a country we don't recognize the amazing benefit we derive from the innovation economy here, which is driven by entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, and that we should be doing everything we can to embrace it. So I've seen a maturation going on that some of it's not so good, some of it's not so conducive to continue to promote, to promoting entrepreneurship versus kind of constraining it. That, I'd like to see that get relaxed and changed.
Well, I want to get into some of our audience questions.
Sure.
And the first one is a good one considering your experience as an enterprise investor and also as an early employee at Symantec. Timothy is asking, what do you see as the biggest hurdles facing enterprise startups in 2013? And when investing in an enterprise startup, what do you look for that suggests that the startup could overcome these hurdles?
I think that the challenge for any enterprise company is always its first 10 customers. It's a relatively consistent challenge, is how do I get those first 10 customers and then be maniacal about making sure they're really happy. And the reason that matters so much is they serve as your references so you can get your next 50. So if you don't get your first 10 and make them happy, the chances of getting your next 50 are pretty much non-existent. Now, so I think that's a consistent concern that I've seen for doing almost every one of them. What I've seen change is how you're getting your first 10 customers. I think the business model innovation is just as innovative as the technology innovation going on in the enterprise. So rather than going sort of top-down selling, people are trying to get at the employee base of an enterprise, get them hooked on the product, and doing bottoms-up selling.
That's interesting.
And
okay.
it's kind of...
Could you give me an example of that?
Well, actually, a really early on example, which I suppose is now on its decline, was think about the BlackBerry. Think about the BlackBerry was really done bottoms up. People brought in their BlackBerries, started using them. Then before you knew it, became an industry standard. Now we've moved on, but later, Dropbox I think is a great example of this phenomenon. People just started using it.
And now Dropbox is sort of getting into the enterprise.
I think Dropbox has done really well of getting into the enterprise, and so I think those are those are examples. But I think innovating around that business model to get those first customers is key.
That's very, very interesting. I think that sort of parallels into that idea of the consumerization of the enterprise, and certainly how the enterprise is changing towards a more consumer focus.
Well, think about who's starting to work in enterprises. It's a generation shift. We talk about digital natives versus digital imports. I'm a digital import. You're probably a digital native.
Maybe, I don't know.
But as that generation graduates school and are the workers in these enterprises, do you think they want to look at crappy old enterprise software that we all tolerated? No, they want the beautiful things. If I'm working in procurement at a company, I want my procurement system to look like Amazon.
Right. That's right.
If I got to use the corporate directory, I want it to look like Facebook. And so you're forced to consumerize enterprise software, all for the better. All for makes it more usable, makes it more fun to use, and I think it makes adoption possible.
Well, moving on to our next question, Kevin, his question is, when investing millions of dollars in a company, what is your expected ROI time frame to get that money back? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? What are VCs thinking?
Well, it's a question that's tough to answer as like this number, because it depends on industry segment. If you're a life science investor, your time frame for liquidity is going to be longer than if you are investing in a consumer internet company. And the consumer internet company might be a little bit shorter than an enterprise software company. Consumer internet company, you might be able to tell whether you have audience within 6 months, and you maybe, if you're lucky, you could get your company bought for $1 billion in the first 18 months.
Instagram.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
I don't think you can plan on those types of things, but that can happen. So I think you have a relatively shorter time frame, so I'll try and be more specific to the answer. On the consumer side, you probably should expect that within 5 years, you're going to be looking at some liquidity. I think in the enterprise side, it may be closer to 7 years, 6 to 7 years.
Okay.
Life science, it's probably a little bit longer, 7 to 8 years.
Now, enterprise, why is it a little bit longer? Maybe that's a stupid question, but I'm...
Well, no, there are no stupid questions. It takes a while to develop the product. Typically, it's usually some innovation around some technology innovation, something hard that no one's ever done before, and that may take a couple of years just to get the product developed into a form where others can start to utilize it. And then you start the process of the selling process. A typical enterprise sales cycle is 3 to 6 months, versus a consumer company. A lot of times it's about the business model, it's about the new message, about the new way of doing something, and you can put it up fast and you start testing, doing A/B testing.
Right.
Okay, this one's not working, let's change it, let's do this, and that whole process, and you get relatively instant gratification, instant feedback. It may not be gratifying, but instant feedback is whether you did it right or wrong.
That's very, very interesting. I didn't realize that the return for enterprise companies ends up being a little bit farther out.
It can be. Look, every comment I say, there's an exception. I've seen liquidity in under 5 years in enterprise companies? Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And I've been lucky enough to be parts of some of those too. But if you're planning on it, you ought to think that you're going to have a 5 to 7 year time horizon in an enterprise software company.
Very interesting. Paul sent us a question. When looking to invest in an early stage startup, what metrics are used to see if it will conflict with another one of your current investments? And then, what happens if a portfolio company ends up conflicting with a fellow portfolio company?
So we always like to say that certainly when we make our initial investments in companies, we try not to knowingly invest in things that are competing with another portfolio company. And the reason for that is any good venture firm wants to put all their wood behind an arrow, right? You want to know that when you're out trying to recruit some talent, that you're recruiting them for this company, not having to say, well, go here, come pick which one you want.
Right.
And that's what an entrepreneur wants. They want to know that you're behind them. You're behind them all the way. And that's why you try and avoid conflict. Now it happens. There are companies that eventually morph, or I guess the current terminology is pivot, and they end up pivoting into each other. So then what do? You set up a Chinese wall of sorts, and different partners working on them. You do your best not to share any kind of information that somebody might find proprietary, and you work them both as hard as you possibly can. So it's not really metric based to the question. It's more market based, and sometimes these companies start colliding. You can't avoid it, but entrepreneurs.
Has that happened for Kleiner ever with companies?
Sure, it doesn't happen that much, but absolutely. We have two great companies, one called Goji, one called Pinger, that are in pretty similar marketplaces around texting and communications and things along those lines. They didn't start out that way, but they are today. They both do really well. And so you like you said, with these situations, you have a partner that's on Pinger and a partner on Goji, and there's sort of a wall there. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Ted, unfortunately we have not that much time left, but I feel like I could speak to you for hours on everything that you know.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Let's break with convention. But thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back and can continue this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. It's fun.
Thanks.